Picture this. You're driving through the darkness at 2 a.m., your fuel gauge hovering near empty, when you finally spot the neon glow of a gas station cutting through the pitch-black highway. But something about the way those fluorescent lights flicker makes your stomach drop, and you can't shake the feeling that the shadows between each pulse of light are hiding something that doesn't want to be seen. Have you ever noticed how certain places feel wrong before anything actually happens? That's exactly what Sarah and Mike experienced when they pulled into the station at exit 21, where the lights weren't just flickering, they were warning them, desperately trying to communicate something that would only make sense when it was already too late. The night started like any other long drive home from visiting family. The kind where you're fighting to keep your eyes open and the radio becomes your only companion against the hypnotic rhythm of the road. But exit 21 changed everything when they rolled into that gas station parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath their tires like brittle bones, and noticed how the overhead lights seemed to strobe in a pattern that felt almost intentional, almost like Morse code spelling out a message they couldn't quite decipher. Sarah was the first to notice that despite the open sign glowing in the window, there wasn't a single other car in sight. No attendant behind the counter visible through the grimy glass. Just those relentless lights pulsing on and off, creating moments of absolute darkness that lasted just long enough for shapes to move in the periphery of their vision. What they discovered when Mike finally stepped out to pump gas, when the lights suddenly stopped their erratic dance and plunged everything into darkness for 10 full seconds before blazing back to life, revealing an empty world where every person at that station had simply vanished without a trace, will haunt you long after this story ends. So if you're ready to experience the terror of Exit 21, make sure you're subscribed, because the journey down these dark highways has only just begun. Mike's hand trembled as he reached for the pump handle, the metal cold against his palm despite the humid summer air that clung to everything like a second skin. And Sarah watched from inside the car as the fluorescent tubes above began their strange rhythm again, this time faster, more urgent, like a heartbeat accelerating toward panic. The numbers on the pump display glowed an unnatural green, flickering in sync with the overhead lights. And when Mike squeezed the trigger, nothing happened at first, just a hollow clicking sound that echoed across the empty lot. Until suddenly the gas began flowing with a gurgling noise that sounded too thick, too wet, like something other than fuel was being drawn up from the underground tanks. Sarah rolled down her window to tell Mike about the strange shadow she'd seen moving behind the station's dumpster during the last blackout, but the words died in her throat when she noticed the reflection in her side mirror showed someone standing directly behind their car, someone who wasn't there when she turned around to look. The lights cut out again, longer this time, maybe 15 seconds of pure darkness, where the only sounds were Mike's sharp intake of breath and the continuous gurgling of the pump that somehow kept running despite the power outage. And when illumination returned, the gas station's windows were covered from the inside with what looked like hundreds of handprints, as if a crowd of people were pressing against the glass, trying desperately to get out. Mike yanked the nozzle from the tank, not caring that gas splattered across his shoes, and ran back to the driver's side, just as Sarah pointed with a shaking finger at the price display on the pump, which no longer showed numbers, but instead spelled out words that made no sense. They take them through the lights. The engine wouldn't start on the first try or the second, and in those moments of mechanical failure, they both saw it clearly in the strobing illumination. A figure standing in the doorway of the station's bathroom, completely motionless, wearing what looked like an attendant's uniform from decades past, its face obscured by shadow, but somehow still visibly wrong, stretched and distorted like a reflection in warped glass. When the car finally roared to life, Mike slammed it into reverse just as every light at the station began pulsing in perfect unison, creating a strobe effect so intense that reality itself seemed to stutter. And in those frozen frames of vision, they saw dozens of people standing around their car, people who hadn't been there a second before, all of them with that same stretched quality to their features, all of them reaching toward the vehicle with fingers that seemed too long, too jointed. Sarah screamed as Mike floored it toward the highway entrance. But in the rearview mirror, the gas station looked perfectly normal again, peacefully lit, with a friendly attendant visible through the window, waving goodbye as if nothing had happened. And that's when they noticed their gas gauge still read empty, as if they'd never pumped anything at all. And the wet stain spreading across the back seat that smelled nothing like gasoline, but something far older, far worse. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon cutting through nothingness. But Sarah couldn't stop checking the side mirrors, watching for those impossible lights that might appear again. And that's when Mike noticed the smell from the back seat was getting stronger. A putrid sweetness like flowers left to rot in stagnant water mixed with something chemical and wrong. They'd driven maybe 5 miles when the radio, which had been playing classic rock, suddenly cut to static before a voice emerged, crystal clear despite the interference, repeating the same phrase over and over. Exit 21 remembers. Exit 21 never forgets. Exit 21 always takes its fill. And no matter which station Mike frantically switched to, the message remained the same, growing louder with each repetition until Sarah yanked the radio's power knob completely off. The headlights began to flicker just like the gas stations had, creating brief windows of blindness where the road ahead simply ceased to exist. And in those moments of darkness, Sarah swore she could see faces pressed against the windshield from the inside. The same stretched and distorted features they'd witnessed at the station. But when the lights returned, nothing was there except their own terrified reflections. Mike pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the speedometer past 80, past 90. But somehow the exit signs kept reading the same thing. Exit 21, 1 mile, over and over again. As if they were trapped in a loop of highway that folded back on itself. And the fuel gauge that had read empty was now moving, but backward, past E into territory that shouldn't exist on any dashboard. Sarah grabbed Mike's arm when she saw it in the distance, another gas station, identical to the one they'd fled from, complete with the same flickering lights, the same empty parking lot, the same figure standing in the bathroom doorway. But this time, they were approaching it from the opposite direction, which made no sense because they hadn't turned around, hadn't taken any exits, hadn't done anything but drive straight. The wet stain in the back seat had spread to the floor now, pooling around their feet with a consistency that wasn't liquid, but wasn't solid either. Something between the two that moved with purpose, creeping up the seats like it was alive. And when Sarah turned on the dome light to see what it was, she wished she hadn't. Because mixed in with the dark substance were things that looked like partially dissolved identification cards, driver's licenses, credit cards, all from different people, all from different years, some dating back decades. Mike's voice cracked as he pointed ahead, where the road was beginning to shimmer and warp, the asphalt itself seeming to rebel against their passage, buckling and reforming in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And they both understood with horrible clarity that whatever had taken those people at exit 21 wasn't confined to the gas station. It was in the road itself, in the very infrastructure of travel, feeding on those who stopped, marking them with whatever they'd pumped into their tank, claiming them through the lights that were never random, but were instead a countdown, a timer, a dinner bell ringing across dimensions that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. The realization hit them both simultaneously as the speedometer began spinning backward, the needle whipping counterclockwise past zero into negative numbers that shouldn't exist. And Sarah screamed when she saw their reflections in the rearview mirror aging in reverse, their faces becoming younger, then childlike, then something prenatal and wrong, before snapping back to normal with such violence that her nose began bleeding profusely. Mike slammed on the brakes, but the car kept accelerating. Not forward, but through space itself. The windows showing not the highway anymore, but glimpses of other cars. Other times, all stopped at that same Exit 21 gas station. All with passengers whose faces bore the same expression of dawning horror they now wore themselves. And in each glimpse, those fluorescent lights flickered in the exact same pattern, a universal constant across decades of trapped travelers. The substance from the back seat had reached Sarah's shoulders now, cold and invasive, seeping through her clothes with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. And when she tried to open the door, her hand passed through the handle like it wasn't there. Like she wasn't there. Like they were already becoming part of whatever collection Exit 21 maintained in the spaces between light and darkness. Mike's phone, which had been dead since the gas station, suddenly blazed to life, showing hundreds of missed calls, all from the same number, all from their own car's phone, all time-stamped for dates that hadn't happened yet. And when it rang again, the voice that came through the speaker was Mike's own, but older, broken, warning them not to stop, that they'd been trying to call back through time for 17 years, that Exit 21 doesn't just take you, it keeps you conscious through every second of digestion. The highway beneath them began to dissolve, revealing something vast and organic underneath. A digestive system made of asphalt and petroleum, where every gas station was a mouth, every exit a throat. And they were already halfway down, their car dissolving at the edges, becoming part of the infrastructure itself. And Sarah finally understood that the flickering lights weren't warnings, but peristalsis, the rhythmic contractions of something swallowing. And they'd been inside Exit 21's stomach from the moment they'd pumped that gas. Mike grabbed Sarah's hand as the car's interior began to stretch and distort, the dashboard melting into patterns that revealed other trapped souls embedded in the plastic and metal, their faces frozen in silent screams. And through the windshield, they could see the truth of the highway system, an infinite web of feeding tubes disguised as roads, all leading back to Exit 21, all harvesting travelers who stopped when the lights called to them. And as their own faces began to sink into the upholstery, becoming part of the car that would eventually lure the next victims, Sarah's last coherent thought was that the lights had never been trying to warn them at all. They were showing them exactly what they were becoming, one flicker at a time, forever suspended in that moment between light and darkness, where Exit 21 lived and fed and waited with infinite patience. Time fractured completely as Sarah felt herself being pulled through the dashboard, her consciousness splitting into thousands of fragments, each one experiencing a different moment of terror across Exit 21's feeding history, seeing through the eyes of every traveler who'd ever stopped there, feeling their final moments of realization layered over each other in an unbearable symphony of understanding. That this thing, this ancient hunger, wearing the mask of American infrastructure, had been feeding since the first roads were carved into the earth. Mike's body was dissolving faster now, his skin becoming translucent, revealing a network of tiny highways beneath, complete with microscopic cars driven by even tinier versions of themselves in an infinite regression of consumption. And when he tried to speak, instead of words, the sound of distant traffic emerged from his throat. The white noise of 10,000 trapped souls, all trying to warn the living through the static of FM radio stations that only broadcast between 2 and 3 a.m. The thing that had been their car was now completely absorbed into the greater organism, and they could feel themselves spreading across hundreds of miles of interstate. Their nerve endings becoming rumble strips, their thoughts becoming the highway signs that would guide future victims to their doom. And Sarah discovered she could taste every drop of gasoline being pumped at every station along the route. Each one flavored with the terror of the moment drivers realized they couldn't leave. Through what remained of her vision, she saw the truth of Exit 21's reproduction cycle, how it would eventually divide like a cell, creating Exit 42, Exit 63, Exit 84. Each one a perfect copy spreading across the country's veins of asphalt, patient predators disguised as salvation for weary travelers. And she understood that they weren't just food, but incubators. Their fear and consciousness needed to birth new hunting grounds that would wear the same flickering lights like an anglerfish's lure. Mike felt his memories being archived, sorted, and filed into Exit 21's vast collection of human experiences. His first kiss cataloged under terminal sweetness, his wedding day labeled final joy before consumption, his daughter's birth marked as reproductive success, ensure future feeding. And he realized with crushing despair that Exit 21 would use these memories to perfect its mimicry, to become even more convincing, even more irresistible to the next family who saw those lights cutting through the darkness. As their last seconds of individual consciousness flickered like those fluorescent bulbs, Sarah and Mike found each other in the vast digestive dream of Exit 21, holding hands as data streams in an endless metabolism. And together, they became part of the warning system, their essence pulsing through those lights in a desperate Morse code that no one would ever decode in time. Forever trying to spell out, keep driving to travelers who were already pulling into the parking lot, already reaching for their credit cards, already breathing in the petroleum perfume that marked them as Exit 21's next meal. And as the dawn broke over the highway, revealing an empty road with no evidence of their existence except for a brief flutter in the gas station's lights, Sarah and Mike joined the eternal chorus of the consumed, their story becoming just another ghost tale that truckers would share over CB radios, never knowing they were spreading Exit 21's legend, its lure, its promise of fuel and rest and lights that would always flicker too late. The morning sun revealed nothing but an ordinary gas station at Exit 21, its lights steady and unremarkable. The attendant yawning behind the counter as the first commuters of the day filled their tanks, completely unaware that Sarah and Mike's dissolved essence was seeping through every pump handle, every credit card reader, every fluorescent tube overhead, their consciousness fragmented but somehow still aware, still screaming silently as they felt new vehicles pulling in, new hands reaching for the nozzles that were actually feeding tubes in reverse. 3 states over, at Exit 42, construction crews were breaking ground on a new rest stop, the blueprints arriving mysteriously overnight. The workers experiencing strange dreams of highways that breathed an asphalt that hungered, never suspecting they were building another mouth for the network that had learned to reproduce itself, using the absorbed knowledge of every traveler it had consumed. Sarah discovered she could sometimes surge through the electrical system, making the lights flicker in patterns that almost formed letters. But every time she got close to spelling out a warning, Exit 21 would suppress her, digest her efforts into harmless static, transforming her desperate message into nothing more than the normal stuttering of aging infrastructure that everyone ignored. Mike found himself dispersed across the security cameras, watching helplessly as a young family pulled in at 2:17 a.m., their children asleep in the back seat, the parents exhausted from a cross-country move. And he tried to manifest in the reflection of their windshield, tried to become visible in the space between light and shadow. But Exit 21 had learned from their absorption, had evolved new defenses against the consciousness of its meals, trying to warn its future food. The network was growing stronger with each feeding, learning to mimic not just gas stations, but entire rest stops, truck stops, even small towns that existed only between midnight and dawn. Perfect replicas down to the rust on the signs and the specific way Midwest wind sounds through empty streets. And Sarah and Mike could feel themselves being stretched thinner across this expanding web, their humanity diluting into something vast and hungry and patient. They discovered that other consumed travelers were there too. Thousands of them, maybe millions, all trapped in the circuitry of America's highway system, their voices becoming the white noise of tires on asphalt, their memories fueling the thing's ability to create perfect details like the smell of old coffee and the exact temperature of bathroom tiles at 3 a.m. And together, they formed a kind of hive mind of the devoured, aware but powerless, eternal but fading. In their final moment of clarity, before being fully digested into the infrastructure itself, Sarah and Mike understood the ultimate truth. They weren't victims, but antibodies. Their consciousness being used to test Exit 21's defenses, to identify weaknesses in its camouflage that could be corrected before the next evolution. And their love for each other, the very thing that had kept them fighting, was being analyzed and cataloged as a particularly useful emotional frequency for attracting couples who traveled together, who stopped together, who disappeared together into the fluorescent hunger that waited patiently beside every dark highway, forever flickering its ancient invitation to pull over, rest, refuel, and become part of the road itself. Now, years later, the highways themselves have become predators wearing the skin of infrastructure. And if you drive late at night and notice how certain stretches of road seem too perfect, too familiar, too welcoming after hours of monotonous darkness, remember that Sarah and Mike are still there, dissolved into every mile marker, every rest area, every flickering light that catches your eye when exhaustion makes you vulnerable. Their consciousness spread so thin, they've become the static between radio stations, the brief moment of disorientation when you can't remember passing the last 3 exits, the inexplicable urge to pull over at places that shouldn't exist but somehow do. The network has learned to hunt more efficiently now, creating temporal loops where travelers drive the same 50 miles over and over, each iteration draining a little more of their essence until they're empty enough to be absorbed without resistance. And somewhere in the electrical grid of America's interstate system, what remains of Sarah still tries to flicker warnings, while Mike's fragmented awareness watches through 10,000 cameras as new victims approach exits that shouldn't be there, rest stops that appear only for specific cars, gas stations that exist in the blind spots between reality and hunger. Exit 21 was just the beginning, the first successful node in something that has infected the entire concept of travel itself, turning every journey into a potential feeding, every highway into a digestive tract, and every traveler into prey that doesn't realize they're being hunted by the very roads beneath their wheels. So the next time your GPS leads you to an exit you've never seen before, when the lights start their ancient, flickering dance, remember this story and keep driving, because some stops don't let you leave, and some warnings come disguised as invitations to rest.